edition of the All in Skills podcast. This week, I'm delighted to have our first guest from New Zealand, Ben Rose. Hello.
Hey, how you going?
I'm very well, Ben. What are you doing in New Zealand?
I've lived here for 22 years, so came over here quite a long time ago, met my wife here, had my family here, and love it. Been a Kiwi ever since.
And in Auckland?
In Auckland, yeah.
And I'm from your accent, I'm assuming that you're from the UK as well.
Yeah, originally from the UK, so got on at Heathrow, stepped off at Auckland, and forgot to go any further, so stayed put.
So what is it that you do?
So I am head of financial services at the New Zealand AA. So I'm a general manager running a financial services business.
And how long have you been in that position?
Been in this role for about a year, but I've been doing CEO and general manager type roles in financial services for longer than I care to remember.
Is that what you studied? Or what's your academic background?
So completely unrelated, but very interesting. So I studied Spanish and Portuguese, specializing in literature of the Middle Ages, which was really interesting and not very helpful when I came out of university. I love languages and was lucky enough to get a place to study a couple of them at university. So Spanish and Portuguese, and really enjoyed that 4 years. For me, it was less about learning the skills to do a job and more about learning how to learn and learning about discipline and turning up and living as an adult and all of those skills that serve you quite well later on. But when you get to the end of a modern languages degree, you got a few decisions to make about, okay, what now?
Did that degree involve you spending time in a Spanish or Portuguese speaking country?
Yeah, it did. The third year of a 4-year degree, you spent the year in one of the countries. So I spent a year teaching English as a teaching assistant in Barcelona, which was pretty cool. And it was quite an interesting sort of experience because you go as an individual and you're there. You've got a job, but nothing else. So you've got to find your feet. You've got to find accommodation. You've got to build a sort of a life and it stood me in good stead for when I emigrated later in life, but it was a really good experience in getting out of your comfort zone and just meeting people and building relationships and all of those things that actually end up being quite handy in a business career. But yeah, spending a year overseas by yourself, actually, that was one of the most formative parts of the degree, I have to say. I discovered that the Spanish I spoke wasn't the Spanish that people spoke in Spain. So I was speaking like a textbook and I very quickly had to learn to speak like a Spaniard. But I made friends with other students who were doing that sort of thing, but most of my friends were Spanish. They were started off as kids of other teachers who they introduced me to, and then I met friends of friends and sort of built my own network there. And it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. Pretty challenging on day one. I remember that sort of arriving on day one with a suitcase and thinking, what now? Like where do people go? What do they do? And it's kind of an exciting challenge to sort of start from that and build up. And I repeated that later on when I moved to New Zealand from the UK. Yeah, if anyone is thinking about should they do a modern languages degree, my advice would be absolutely yes. It's really quite formative. It's awesome.
And you're Catalan by the time you left?
Yeah, not bad. Not too bad. I did irritatingly have colleagues at the school who would only speak Catalan, even though they knew that I didn't speak it. So you kind of have to learn it in Barcelona. So I got passable in Catalan by the end of it.
Was there any family influence on you to make that choice? Was that entirely down to you? How did you make that decision?
No, it was my decision. Although both my parents were and are linguists, so it was in the blood. My mum went off overseas on an exchange trip and got fluent in French and has had that language skill for years. So it was always a thing. And I just really loved it. I had an amazing teacher at school who taught Spanish, and he just opened my eyes to the whole world of foreign literature. I started off like everybody does doing languages because I had to, and you had to make a choice. But I just discovered a whole world that I hadn't been aware of and really got excited by. And so, university was an opportunity for me. I wasn't really thinking about the job I was going to do later. It was an opportunity for me to sort of get really deep in a subject that I loved. Yeah, the university I went to, the languages degrees were very literature heavy. So I got to study some amazing authors and playwrights over the years that I'd never heard of, and it was incredible. Just opened my mind.
Moins.
Yep, he was in there. He was in there. I actually, funnily enough, I dated a descendant of his at university who was studying Portuguese, which felt like a bit of a cheat. But anyway, yeah, he was on the list.
So you graduate, you've got your degree in modern languages. What was your feeling at that point? What thoughts were going through your head about, well, next steps? What am I going to do?
So I actually remember the exact moment. In that year overseas, another student who I was friends with, he and I caught up and we were sitting down. He was always going to go into the army. That was his path after university. And I remember saying how jealous I was that he knew what he was going to do and I didn't know. And what did he think I should do? And he said, well, you're a people person and why don't you think about something like media or advertising? And so because I'm old, I got a copy of the Yellow Pages and I started writing letters on paper to advertising agencies. And I thought what I'll do is I'll do a couple of weeks work experience to understand what an advertising agency is and does and see if that's for me. And so I wrote lots and lots and lots of letters. I got a reply and I got some work experience at an ad agency in London. And that eventually turned into a role in their graduate programs. I can pinpoint the exact moment, but what I realize now is that there were so many options I just wasn't aware of. And advertising, I'd never really heard of it, didn't know the options, didn't know what that looked like. But getting inside the business and seeing what people did day to day really opened my eyes to it and showed me that this is where I wanted to be.
London's renowned for its advertising agencies and its reputation in this field. Was it a large agency you worked for?
It was, yeah, it was a big agency. So yeah, and it was, and I look back now and I was actually really lucky to get the place there. But, I say luck, I worked really hard to get it. I was methodical and decided what I was going to do and who I was going to target and wrote the letters and sent the letters. And, nowadays you'd send emails or go on LinkedIn, but back then it was paper letters. And I think there was over 100. There were over 100 that I sent and I got one back. But it was
it a typed letter or handwritten?
It was handwritten. Yeah, they were handwritten. Each one was handwritten. I pretty much wrote the same thing, but I wrote it by hand. And I sent it to the CEO of each one because I didn't know who to send it to, so I sent it to the CEO. And luckily, one passed it on. I'm this random student who they don't know. I've got absolutely no leverage. There's no reason why they should respond to me. So I thought, well, at least I can do that and capture their attention. So there was capturing their attention and there was volume. And luckily, I got a letter back.
So 1 out of 100, that's pretty good.
Yeah. They came back and they said, look, if you want to come and do some work for free, that's fine. Come work for free. And so I did. I spent 2 weeks. I started off in spending a few days in the mail room. And then I asked, can I spend a few days with your account service people and your creative teams? The creative teams told me no. I spent time with the account service people and just asked lots of questions and watch what they did. I, asked them about their career paths. And it was fun and it was exciting, but it was also really quite challenging emotionally because I realized I loved it and I really wanted to be in that place. And I thought, right, well, I'm going to have to make this work. And how do I go about this? And so then the question was, okay, well, you've got your foot in the door. How do you turn that into a permanent job with a salary and a title and a desk?
How did you turn that? You asked for 2 weeks, is that correct?
Yeah, got 2 weeks. I got them to extend it by another 2 weeks, also for free. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to have some experience on my CV. Because my only experience at the time was working in a supermarket or working in a sandwich bar and doing Saturday jobs. There was nothing advertising related. So I thought they were a big name. Euro RSCG back in the day was a big name. So I thought if I can have that for as long as possible on my CV, then that looks good, and that will show that I kind of get it. The way that you got jobs in those days in advertising agencies as a graduate was they'd all run graduate schemes, and so there'd be an application intake for each agency once a year, and they were really competitive. There were thousands of people would go for them at the time, and so I applied for lots and I got a place at an agency called TBWA, who I think looked at my CV because it had a good agency's name on it. And then I went through that application process. That was the beginning of my career. I got one of 12 roles that year and started off as a junior account executive, which meant I was the guy who made the copies and did the photocopying. But I was on £1,500 at the time, which, it was quite long ago, but it also wasn't very much back then. But it was something, and it was an in.
So how long did you stay in that particular post? I mean, clearly you didn't stay on £13,000 a year. There was
No,
growth.
yeah, there was. I had a bit of movement between different ad agencies in London. Each time a slightly bigger role or a different role, or a bit of a step up. And I ended up working in a role that had the very grand title of international account manager, which was based in London, but working with overseas colleagues on Unilever and some other big brands. And it sort of opened my eyes to overseas and international marketing and advertising as well. And so lots of really good skills learned in ad agencies. You have to work under pressure. You have to, it's very results focused, very outcome focused. As a junior, as an account executive, you've got to be all across the detail. So there's a lot that goes into putting campaigns together and making sure they run smoothly. And so being, good at execution and learning about that, learning the financial side of business, really important, because even within a small campaign, you've got to make sure it runs profitably. So you've got to be aware of your P&L. So yeah, lots of really good skills. But I think that the biggest thing that working in advertising gave me was just exposure to lots of different industries. So I worked across news media, automotive, financial services, sport. So working in ad agencies where they have lots of different clients means, particularly in junior roles, you get to work across lots of different ones. And so what that shows you is that every category, every industry, every business has got some really interesting challenges that they need to fix, they need to solve, that you might not be as obvious to you outside the industry. So I worked on Unilever on fluoromargarine, and actually quite interesting. In different countries, in some countries it's seen as a medicine, in some countries it's seen as a food. And so how do you put together a marketing position and communicate that in a way that's consistent across those markets, but works, in terms of each local territory? So yeah, lots of interesting stuff to learn in advertising, I found.
Unilever alone is just fascinating. The range of products that they have, the markets that they dominate in different places where you don't even think top of mind Unilever, but they are enormous, absolutely enormous. And as you pointed out something really interesting in terms of those cultural sensitivities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Brit. I'd been overseas on holiday, but not worked in other countries, and so I'm starting to learn those nuances was really, really interesting. And I reflect now on all of the things that I learned in those jobs and in those roles and in that industry. And I think that the learning for me was to be open to opening a door and seeing where it takes you, because I had never heard of Unilever at the time. I'd not heard of a lot of these brands. I didn't really know what it took to put together a campaign. And so yeah, you're learning a lot, and it starts to open up your horizons for your future career, because I started off in advertising. I'm not in advertising now, but it was advertising that opened my eyes to marketing, and marketing that opened my eyes to sales and business. And so I think, yeah, the job that you go into at the very beginning of your career might be, but it also might not be the one you end up in at the end as well.
How did you decide as a young man who entered the advertising industry through sheer chutzpah, basically? How did you decide at which point you were going to be looking for a new role in a new organization?
I think early on, I wasn't very planned, to be perfectly honest. I think early on, I was not earning enough to pay my rent and my travel card. And so when I saw a role advertised with a better job title and more money, I went for it. And so I was quite driven by the earning side of things when I was very young. I think what I learned, and I learned this through a mentor years later, that unless you have vague idea of where you want to go in your career, it's very hard to assess whether the next opportunity is the right one or not. And so I worked in kind of similar roles in different agencies doing similar sorts of things, maybe for a bit more money, but kind of the same sort of role for a while. And it was only until I actually got into marketing on the client side, where organizations tend to invest more in things like career development and coaching and mentoring, that I actually deliberately thought that through and started thinking, actually, where do I want to go to, and what are the gaps that I need to fill to get there? And does the next role help me with that or not?
What was the shortest period you spent in a company?
Shortest period I spent in a company was 9 months. 9 months, yeah. It was a role that just wasn't right, and I made the call. Not good, not working. Pull the pin. Longest I've been in a role is well, I'm currently in. I'm chair of a charity of Ronald McDonald, New Zealand, and we've been doing that for 7 years.
What point did you move to the next milestone in your career?
So in between, moved countries, working still in advertising. I came to New Zealand to work on Tourism New Zealand's advertising campaign, and loved the country so much I never left. But I was working in advertising because you work across a broad range of clients. You work with different clients, so different marketing managers at each of those places. And I would see opportunities to do things differently. And I would hear them talking about other aspects of their role that weren't just the advertising, that sounded really interesting. And I thought I'd quite like to work client side. I'd quite like to get more in depth into a single brand. You're very broad, you're sort of two inches deep and a mile wide. But what I wanted to do was really get deep into a brand and be accountable for the end-to-end experience of that brand. And that's what marketers do. So they look at things like the advertising, but also the product design and the pricing and the placement and the channel strategy and the partnerships. And so I was working on just one part of that picture, but I realized that there was so much more to marketing. And so I wanted to make that move client side. And that's quite a challenging move to make, because lots of marketers, they look askance at advertising agency people making that move, because they think, well, you don't have the depth of experience, you're broad and that sort of thing. And so I got a contract role working with Auckland Council. And Auckland, we had the Rugby World Cup come to New Zealand, and so there was a lot of work around campaigns for different audiences and all sorts of activity. And so that was my sort of entree to the client side marketing world. And then once I'd done that and had that on my CV to show other marketers that I was credible and I could do marketing, then I got a permanent roles, and I got into my real love, which was financial services. I ended up in head of retail marketing at ASB Bank, which is one of the banks over here, and that was a role where I was running a team and responsible for all of the retail marketing for a bank's retail, all the marketing for a bank's retail products, so home loans and credit cards and term deposits and that sort of thing. From what the pricing should be, what the offer should be, what the promotional calendar looks like, but working with the product teams on how do we differentiate our products versus others. And so that was, I really started to sort of mature my understanding of the different levers you can pull in a business to get outcomes. It was a great time.
Was that working in-house or as an agency providing services?
That was in-house. Yeah, that was in-house. So full-time on banking.
And how different did that feel?
Very, very. So when you work inside an organization and you live and breathe that brand, you really, really buy into that brand, and you actually, I think you start to add a lot more value because of your depth of understanding of the culture of the organization and the nature of their products and their relationship with their customers. And so, I really enjoyed it. And it was, working in banks is quite good if you're wanting to learn, because banks tend to have very good processes around sales and service. And so there's a playbook for most things. And so it's a great place to really sort of hone your craft.
You achieved a position of leadership. Can I ask how old you were at this point?
I would have been, I think my first leadership role, I was 23.
So
agencies.
Pedigree.
Yeah. I mean, it's only a few years ago now, but yeah. When I started off in the industry I was in, there was very little sort of coaching and mentoring. You were sort of thrown at the deep end and all the best and away you go. And I found as I worked in different agencies, I felt that there was a real gap there, and I would peer mentor colleagues, and I started, as I became more senior, to sort of coach more junior team members. And so I ended up running teams and managing teams, because I didn't yet know the difference between leadership and management, coaching and helping. And then I later on learned, particularly in the corporate sector, what leadership is and how it differs to management. And it's become something I've loved to do ever since. Managing is what you're doing with managing is you're allocating resources, and those resources are people. But leadership is actually about growing people and setting them up to do amazing things. And so that looks quite different, dependent on the individual, where they're at, what they want, what they need. So yes, management is just marshalling resources, I think, whereas leadership is more about giving everyone a sense of what great looks like and then helping them get there.
Do you find that that's changed in a positive or negative way over the years you've been working? This commitment to professional growth and professional development?
Yeah, I think expectations have grown. I think there wasn't. I didn't have an expectation going into jobs that I would get that development, and I think now there is, and there should be, an expectation from someone going into a role. Well, I'm going to give you these outputs that you've put in my job description, but what am I going to get back from you? So how are you going to help me grow and improve as an individual, and not necessarily just professionally in terms of these skills, but also I want you now to return the value that I'm giving you by helping me build my career for my next step. And I think that's absolutely great. But it's definitely a change that I've sort of noticed over the years.
You mentioned earlier on about Ronald McDonald House, and I'd like you to tell me a little bit about that. I mean, how did you get involved, and what motivated you to get involved in the first place?
Sure. So I've always done charity work as well as professional work, and my sort of thinking around that is, over the years I've built up a number of skills thanks to the places I've worked, and I'd love to be able to put those to use to help others who don't able to do those things. And so while every day I turn up to work and I do the best I can do and generate results for my employer, I also always try and carve out time so I can kind of put those skills to use in the community as well. So over the years I've done things like school boards or been on the boards of charities and those sorts of things. And when I was running sales and marketing at a health insurer here in New Zealand, and we were looking for a charity partner, and we met lots of different charities, and I went into the Ronald McDonald House in Auckland to have a look around and understand what it was that they did. And when I realized within minutes, first of all, it brought me to tears, because what we do makes a huge difference to families who are going through really, really tough times. What we do is we give them a place to stay, we give them people to connect with, we just take away the hassle of where we're going to stay, how are the kids going to go to school, all of those things that you worry about that take you away from looking after your child in hospital. So within minutes, I sort of said to them, how can we help and what can I do? And I've been involved with them ever since, joined their board and brought, I suppose, the skills that I've learned over the years, and eventually ended up becoming deputy chair and then have been chair for the last year or so. Then years later, so I'm a dad of 3, and one of our girls got really sick and spent quite a bit of time in hospital here in Auckland. And then so I'm still a board member, but then I started actually using the facility, and there's a family room in the hospital where you can go for breakfast and lunch and just to sit and have some space. And if you need to do work because you've got a job. And then I really, really understood the difference it made, because it enabled me to keep my job through that period. So I owe Ronald McDonald a lot. So it's great to be able to work with them.
And do you want to tell me something about your present non-charity role? You said the AA.
So the AA is like the UK Automobile Association. So been around for 120 years. It's got almost a third of the country as members. And so my team's role, I look after the team that runs financial services. So we've got a range of insurances, travel insurance, life insurance, health insurance, and we sell those to our members and to our non-members. And we're always building new products, designing new products. And so it's a lot of fun, Would
you say that on a Monday morning you look forward to going to work?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's one of those organizations where, so it's been around for a long time, and now it's going through a big transformation to say, well, how do we evolve and make sure that we're relevant for another 120 years? And so I over the years I've really loved roles where there's been challenge and change and sort of evolution. So it's right in the sweet spot for me.
It sounds like the way you described the work that you did when you got to New Zealand, with the bank in New Zealand, with the AA in New Zealand, these all sound like roles that you've really been, and I'm hesitant to use the word passionate, but roles that you feel passionate about. Advertising for me is a fascinating industry, because you don't choose the client necessarily. The clients turn up. Did you ever feel uncomfortable representing or preparing a campaign for any client in that role in advertising?
I didn't. I didn't, but I might do if I was older, having done it. So I worked on campaigns for newspapers, which back in the day seemed funny, and nowadays you look at it and go, not brilliant. I mean, I didn't. The categories I worked in, I never worked in, tobacco or anything like that. The thing I did find was that when you really learn about a client, you really do develop an affinity and a passion for their business. So I worked on Adidas, for example, and you learn about the history of the brand and all those sorts of things. And there's a culture in agencies of only using your clients' products and not the competitors. And so you do get quite passionate about those products. But no, I've not had anything where I felt uncomfortable. I mean, look, I worked on Tourism New Zealand and now I live here, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question.
I had a couple of clients at British American Tobacco back in the day. And they were involved in marketing, and we had these conversations about ethics and morality and so on. Look, it's a legal product. I wasn't suggesting anything to them. But what was interesting was the measures they needed to take as the ground that they could work on got smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of the box itself and how prominently it can be displayed in the store and so on. They had to become actually quite creative, and I found that process quite interesting. If you can't show anything on the box, how do you promote your product?
I think for me, one of the things I learned later that I liked about financial services, for example, is that it's a regulated industry. So there actually are quite clear guidelines about what you can and can't and should and shouldn't say to make sure that you're not misleading people. So I really I found comfort in that. And I worked at one point, I worked in crypto, which was on the edge of financial services and less regulated. And it was sort of navigating the lack of regulation and interpreting old regulation. And so I think you need to think very carefully about the industry that you do work in. Are you comfortable ethically with it? Because if you're not, then you absolutely shouldn't. You've got a choice about where you work. And yeah, there might be, if you work for a tobacco company, there would be strategic challenges that would be academically interesting. How do I get around this thing? But you might not feel comfortable with if you do an amazing job and it goes gangbusters and they sell thousands of vapes to people. How do you feel about that? So I think it is a really important consideration.
Ben, thank you so much for your time. You've been a really, really interesting guest.
Colin, it's been awesome to catch up. Thank you. Really appreciate your time.